The observation window was 40 centimeters wide and completely transparent to our instruments. And I had been watching the human sleep for 6 hours and 14 minutes before. Attaché Droven finally leaned over my shoulder and said it. "They do this every night," he said. Not with contempt exactly. With the particular flatness of someone describing a biological deficiency they find mildly embarrassing on the subject's behalf. They go completely unconscious, every 26 hours or so, mandatory. They cannot function without it. "I know," I said. "I wrote the intake brief," he straightened. "Then you understand why Command isn't especially concerned about them." I said nothing. I had written the intake brief. I had also been shelling Station Harrow 9 for 11 weeks, which Droven had not, and there were 11 weeks of data sitting in my field logs that I had not yet summarized in language, that Command would find appropriately reassuring. I was choosing my words carefully. On the sense feed, the human, a male, listed in our intercept of their crew manifest as Chief Engineer Rael Sandro, 41 standard years, teen years stationed at deep-range outposts, lay on his sleeping platform with the precise, boneless stillness of a creature that had ceased, temporarily, to be inhabited. His respiratory rate had dropped to 9 cycles per minute. His musculature showed no residual tension. Shh. The biometric overlay we'd threaded into their environmental systems during the 3rd week painted his neural activity in quiet, slow pulses, deep cycle. The literature called it the phase in which the human brain consolidated, processed, and did whatever it was that human brains did in the dark. He looked, I will admit, entirely harmless. Droven had been sent because Command wanted a second assessment. I had flagged certain observations in my preliminary report as requiring follow-up, and the language I had used, careful language, measured language, had apparently not conveyed urgency so much as academic interest. Droven was the military attaché assigned to correct my perspective. He had arrived 4 days ago and spent most of his time in the secondary monitoring room reviewing our archived footage, coming out occasionally to stand beside me and explain what he was seeing in terms I might find more useful. "The dormancy period is the vulnerability window, Hun," he said. "Any species that requires mandatory total system shutdown every cycle has a hard ceiling on its threat profile. We've known this for decades. It's in the xenobiology-based curriculum." "It is," I said. "A dormant human is functionally equivalent to a sedated one. Reaction time, orientation, threat processing, all flatlined. You'd need a full minute at minimum to come back online from deep cycle, probably closer to 3. I watched the feed. Sandro's chest rose and fell. His left hand, hanging slightly off the edge of the platform, did not move. "I documented the transition time in week 4, I said. "It's in the supplemental file. Appendix C." Droven had not read Appendix C, I could tell because he was still talking. "The strategic implication is straightforward," he said. "If you want to understand what humans are capable of, you study their alert state. Their dormancy phase is simply a gap, a recurring, predictable gap in their capability curve. The alarm when it went was not ours. It was Sandro's, a compact tone from somewhere in the corridor outside his quarters, short and sharp, not his scheduled wake cycle, something in the station's systems. A pressure fluctuation, our instruments told us. A minor fault in the coolant routing 2 sections over, the kind of thing that flagged automatically and required a senior engineer's sign-off to clear. I watched the feed. The change was so fast that I initially doubted the timestamp. Sandro had been in deep cycle. His neural trace had been in the slow pulse band, 3 cycles per second. The signature of a brain doing none of the things a brain needs to do in order to operate a body in the world. And then the alarm sounded. 1 tone, not 2, not a sequence. And in the time it took me to register that the tone had occurred, the man was already upright. Not groggy, not blinking, not reorienting, upright, eyes open, oriented toward the door. Checked the timestamp 3 times. The interval between the alarm's first cycle and Sandro achieving full upright posture was 3.8 seconds. By the time the alarm's second cycle completed, he had crossed half the room. By the 4th cycle, he was in the corridor. Droven had gone quiet. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "The transition data is in Appendix C." He didn't answer. I pulled up the full 11 weeks of transition records and arrayed them across the secondary display. 134 observed sleep Alert intervals, documented across all 6 human crew members aboard Harrow 9. The distribution was narrower than I had expected when I first compiled it. The slowest transition in the dataset was 11 seconds, recorded once, crew member who had been ill with a respiratory infection for 3 days. Every other interval fell between 3 and 8 seconds. The median was 4.6. They don't come back online slowly, I said. They don't come back online at all. There is no transition state. The system that was asleep is the same system that is awake. It doesn't reboot, it resumes. Droven was still looking at the feed, where the corridor was now empty. 4 seconds, he said. Median 4.6. But I want you to notice something else. I shifted the display to the biometric overlay, the neural trace data. Look at the wave signature in the 3 seconds before the alarm. Before any external stimulus that could account for the shift, he looked. The trace, 5 seconds before the alarm sounded, had already begun to change. Not a dramatic shift, not consciousness, not awareness by any clinical definition. The slow pulse wave had fractionally quickened, as if something in the sleeping human had detected or anticipated that it was about to be needed. That's in the data for 9 of the 14 incidents where an alert occurred during deep cycle, I said. 9 out of 14, the neural activity shows a pre-stimulus change. The body begins to prepare before the signal arrives. Droven was quiet for a long time. What causes it, he said. I don't know. Neither does the literature. The leading hypothesis is a form of ambient environmental monitoring that continues during dormancy. A background process running in parallel with the deep cycle state below the threshold of consciousness but above the threshold of reaction. Some researchers call it watch sleep. The humans don't have a word for it as far as we can determine. They're not aware it happens. I let that settle. They evolved as prey animals, I said, before they became whatever they are now. Every apex predator on their homeworld hunted in the dark, hunted the sleeping, hunted the unaware. The ones who woke slowly did not survive to pass on the trait. So for several 100,000 years, the only humans who reproduced were the ones whose bodies could go completely unconscious and come back to full combat readiness in under 5 seconds. I saved the display configuration. I had learned in 11 weeks to document everything at the moment it mattered, because there was no predicting when the next moment that mattered would arrive. You called it a vulnerability window, I said. I want you to reconsider the framing. Droven said nothing. Every other species we've cataloged that requires sleep, and there are 47, has a transition interval of no less than 60 seconds. Most are measured in minutes. The Varathi require 90 minutes to achieve full neural function after deep cycle. The sun require nearly 4 hours. We built our strategic models around that baseline because for every other species, dormancy and vulnerability are the same word. Closed the display. For humans, they are not. Down the corridor on the sensor feed, Sandro had reached the coolant routing panel. He was already working, hands moving without hesitation, reading the fault data on the panel's surface. His body completely settled into the task as though he had been awake for hours. He had been asleep 3 minutes ago. What I've been trying to find the right language for, I said, is this. We have been studying human dormancy as the period during which humans are least dangerous. I believe this is exactly backward. A species that voluntarily enters total unconsciousness every 26 hours and exits it 100% of the time, with a median response interval of 4.6 seconds, is not a species that has a vulnerability window. It is a species that has spent a geologically significant period of time sharpening its ability to go from dead to lethal, on demand, with no ramp, every night, as practice. I stood up from the observation console. My shift was over. I had been awake for 14 hours and I required Threnoi biological baseline, approximately 6 hours of graduated rest before I could return to full analytical function. Light sleep first, then moderate, then deep, then a 30-minute reorientation period after waking. I looked at Sandro's hands on the panel. Steady. Precise. I'm going to sleep, I told Droven. File whatever assessment you want to file, but read Appendix C first. I did not wait for his response. I had 11 weeks of data, and I was very tired. And somewhere down that corridor a human was awake in the dark, fixing something, 4 seconds out of a sleep that should have taken him minutes to recover from. I thought, as I left the observation bay, that the word Draven had used, gap, was the most dangerous word in the brief, not because it was wrong, because for 46 other species, it would have been exactly right.